Our next witness is Mark Williams-Thomas, who's a former police detective, criminologist and child protection expert. The argument seems to be that both murder and sexual crimes, particularly those crimes involving children, are somehow in a different moral dimension to all sorts of other crimes, and therefore are never to be fully set aside. Is that right?
I talk particularly around offences against children, and we have to understand the offending behaviour and how offenders operate. And it is very different, the offender that offends against children than commits other serious crimes. So yes, we do need to deal with them separately.
Why?
Because
what puts it into such a totally different moral dimension that redemption, forgiveness is out of the question?
Because of the
always be associated with that crime.
Because of the adeptness, the cunningness, the power, the control that these offenders that offend against children have, and as a result of that, their offending behaviour is very different to those that commit offences such as armed robbers and murderers, because by and large, the large majority of murderers murder on one occasion and that is it. We're not talking about serial murderers here, we're talking about those that have gone to prison because they've committed one murder.
I've worked as a magistrate and I've dealt with people on the sexual offenders register, and I've never come across an answer to the fundamental question: what is the purpose of the register?
Well, the register, and I think there's a large amount of misunderstanding of what the register is about. The register, in simple terms, enables the police to require a certain amount of information. There is a need on the individual.
For what purpose?
Register. Well, the purpose is so that they can keep a track on them, so that they can assess risk. There is a multi-agency public protection arrangement, and it enables those within that, so that's police, health, education, to assess risk of individuals. We talk a lot, and you talk a lot around our people.
Well, you're talking about close surveillance of known child offenders, aren't you? I mean, people who offend against children, but there are many, many people on the sex offenders register who aren't in that category.
No, absolutely, and what I'm saying is about risk. If risk is determined enough to be high, then of course surveillance may be an element of it. But there are many people who sit on the sex offenders register, and all they do is fulfil the requirements, and the police do nothing more to them.
Do you know any crimes that have been solved by the register?
Absolutely. There are people who sit on the sex offenders register who commit offences. I can give you an example of someone who sits on the register who put himself back into an environment where children were. He used a false name. They identified who he was. He was on the sex offenders register, and he's now being prosecuted for failing to comply with that and breaching those requirements and committing further offences. I can tell you practically, and I work in a very practical field, that the sex offenders register is a massive tool for the police, enables them to not only keep track of sex offenders, but it also assists the sex offenders to have knowledge that they are being watched.
What about the case of a young man, say, 20, who has been convicted of date rape, got 3 years for it, goes on the sex offenders register? Is there any logic in him having to report to the police for the rest of his natural life?
Well, those people that go on there for more than 30 months have a requirement to stay on there for life. And if that is a requirement that is there, I believe that they should stay there for life. Don't forget the victim's term is for life. And if that offender has committed that and they've gone for that period of time, then I think they should stay on the register for life.
This issue has become news because the judges have declared that they should have the right, people on the register should have the right to appeal against being on the register. Now, you oppose that, don't you?
Absolutely.
Well, sex offenders have the right to appeal against conviction, against their sentences. Why not against being on the register?
Well, that's a determination as per their length of sentence. So therefore, if they've got more than 30 months, they should currently sits that they go on there for life. And the reason I say that, and I talk particularly around those child sex offenders, which is where the most public concern sits around, is that those people are very devious, very calculated individuals. And don't forget, the majority of those people who have committed their crime, and only let me just finish, 26% of those who come out of prison go back again for further offences. But the children who are victims very rarely come forward at the time, they come forward years later. So those statistics actually don't bear fruit in the way that an armed robber would, because that is reported immediately by the bank that they robbed.
But my question is, justice depends on checks and balances. What's wrong with having a judicial check on what is, after all, a lifetime's imposition?
Because the point is that it's very difficult to assess risk, and this is what it's all about. It's about risk. It's not judging whether someone...
So you're saying you are capable of assessing risk, but a judge isn't?
Well, it's not the judge that's going to make this decision, because the judge puts them on for a life period of time. And then what's being said at this moment in time is that it would be the police that make that judgment. It wouldn't be the court that make that judgment.
But if it's the case that, as you say, paedophiles can't change, and if it's the case that what matters is to protect children, isn't the logic of your argument that we should simply lock up paedophiles, throw away the key, they can't change, they're no longer a threat to children?
No, I'm not saying that. What I'm saying...
Is that the logic of your argument?
Well, no, it isn't the logic for my argument, because if you actually look into it, what we do with sex offenders, and particularly child sex offenders, is treatment. Treatment is really important. You are not going to cure a paedophile. Once a paedophile, always a paedophile. And I use the analogy of an alcoholic. It is very, very similar. The difference is that we can enable offenders to understand their offending behaviour, and by that put things in place to stop them from reoffending. We have to address the issues of access and opportunity and triggers.
But the point is that even under treatment, you will say that they are a risk to children. Why, in your view, should we allow that risk? Why shouldn't we simply say, lock them up, throw away the key?
Well, it is all about risk, and risk is determined towards access and opportunity and understanding. Some people aren't suitable for treatment, others are, and we can't simply put a blanket over the top of everybody. But those that are deemed to be of high risk, then they should never be put back in contact with children at all.
Mark Williams-Thomas, thank you very much indeed.